Hey, and welcome to the next devlog. This one took a bit longer because I was at the AMaze Festival in Berlin, which is an art house games festival where you can kind of play really experimental games and art house games in general. So yeah, I had a really great time there, and yeah, here are some impressions of that. There was this weird game called It's Just a Dream, Don't Worry, made by Lawrence Rickling and Leander Leutzendorf, where you basically had to control your character with a puppet head, which is as weird as it sounds, but it's also super interesting, to be honest. And also the level design was incredibly well made and captured the feeling of a really weird fever dream perfectly. But now let's get back to Calamity and look at what is new and also what has changed since the last devlog. One of the main additions are the portals, so the player now can enter and leave a map. This will tie directly into the overall gameplay, where the player now can save his well-earned loot in stashes in the hub level, which, as you can see, are kind of dummy levels at the moment. The portals are blueprints with some colliders. If the player enters the outer box collider, the blueprint will spawn a NIAGARA system which will display the portal effect. After that, there is a sphere collider which will create a post-processing effect if the player overlaps with it. It will also keep track of the distance the player has to the portal and will intensify the post-process effect based on how far away the player is from the portal. And lastly, there is another box collider which will trigger the level transition, create a loading screen, and it also saves the game. I also changed the spawning system for the enemies. It basically functions in the same way the portals do. There is a box collider in the map which will spawn enemies if the player overlaps with it. If the player then leaves the area again, it will delete all the remaining enemies. The distance in this example is obviously very low. It's just there to show how it works. Spawning the enemies this way will help with the overall performance of the game. But now let's talk about level design. I fucking love level design, so I kind of will nerd out a bit now. So yeah, stick with me or not, it's your choice, to be honest. And let's go. I personally love games that have kind of open worlds where you don't have the need to use a map, or sometimes you don't even have one. Good examples for that are Elden Ring, Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, or Escape from Tarkov. Mark Brown did a very nice explanation about the level design of Zelda Breath of the Wild over on his channel Game Maker's Toolkit. I can highly recommend that video if you are interested in open world level design and want to learn more about it. The kind of open world level design that these games have leads to much more conscious exploration of the game world. The players are kind of noticing more of their surroundings instead of just looking at the minimap. You are more aware of the world you are playing in. Let's look at the example of Elden Ring here. Warning, there will be some slightly spoilers, no bosses or so, but I will spoil parts of the map. There is this iconic scene when you come out of the tutorial and take your first steps into the lands between, and here you will be met with an incredible view of the landscape. Kind of Zelda Breath of the Wild does the same thing here. Yeah. Besides being a stunning and wonderful view, this moment shows you points of interest that want to be explored. It also shows you directly where your first big obstacle lies, which is Stormveil Castle and the first big boss. And the game will repeat this pattern. For example, if you manage to come to Liurnia of the Lakes either after killing Godric the Crafted or just going around his castle, you will once again get a beautiful view which also directly shows you your next objective, which is the Academy of 𝙈𝙎𝙠𝙚 with the next big boss. Elden Ring also does not spoil the overall map at the beginning of the game. It will hide a huge chunk of the map to let you explore the game world at your own pace and don't overwhelm you right away. But why does the player not get lost most of the time, even without using the map? This is due to the fact that the player will always see big points of interest in the distance, either to go towards them because they haven't been there yet, or just simply to recognize them and orientate themselves based off of them. So what does that mean for Calamity? The game will also utilize a level design which will use points of interest to guide the players. I don't want to use a minimap, and also the world maps have to be found in-game and will just show the overall layout of the level and not where the player is located. The players have to figure that out for themselves. I began concepting some level layouts. I used the website Incarnate for that, which is a nice tool to make a fast concept of your maps. The final game will hopefully have different islands to explore, but getting even the first island ready will take a lot of time, so let's focus on the first one for now. After sketching up the basic layout of the map, I took some time to think about the individual areas of the map. The map will basically have 4 areas. To not get overwhelmed with work and also to get a starting point, I will first focus on these 2 areas, which will be the woodlands and the bog. To get a better idea of how these areas should feel, I made a mood board for them. Here is a little summary of that. I really find it helpful to also write down some emotions that you want to evoke in the players when they explore these areas. Finally, it was time to begin sculpting and blocking out the rough layout of the map in Unreal. A huge part of blocking out the level was to get a feeling of the size of the landscape and also the size of the points of interest. In the current map, there will always be visible points of interest to give the player something to explore. The castle in the middle on top of the hill will be the main orientation point for the player. Based on the castle, the player can find out where on the map he is located. For example, Elden Ring's always visible point of interest and final goal is the Erdtree. Also, as we are on the topic of Elden Ring again, Elden Ring's map can also be subdivided in its bigger regions, which kind of work just like separate little islands. This is pretty nice to not overwhelm the player and have separate points of interest in each area. Getting the layout of the first map done took a lot of time, and this will be an ongoing part of development, because the final landscape will depend on how it feels to traverse the level when there are more enemies and assets in it, basically when it's filled with life. After the rough layout was ready, I set out to design one of the areas in more detail. I wanted to build an area as an homage to a favorite series of mine, but I realized I need more assets for that, so I made some more assets. Making the new assets also took quite a while, but now there are 10 more assets and I'm getting better at 3D modeling and especially at texturing. For texturing, I'm using Union Bytes Painter. It's kind of a substance painter for pixel art. The program has a few quirks, but it's a cheap one-time purchase and it's super easy to use. I can highly recommend it and I will put a link to it in the description. As the assets were finished, I began detailing the area, but it is still in a very early stage and will need some more time to get finished and playable. After half of a day placing cliffs and checking their collision, I felt like this ancient meme again. I was there before. Going forward, I'll probably split my time between getting the level design of this first little area ready and trying to get more gameplay like enemies and new weapons into the project. But yeah, that's where the game stands at the moment. I would have loved to show off more stuff and even be further along in the development of the game, but then again, it's kind of a game dev's curse that everything will kind of take longer than expected. So yeah, see you in the next one.
Is that their penis?
What?